welcome to the Room of Requirement. This is going to be a 6-part series that I'm doing on the history of esotericism and magic, and I've been wanting to do this for quite some time. I've taught this a handful of times over the years to my students and at the esoteric church that I attend and my school that I founded. And every time I do it, I get more and more excited to share this information with everyone because it's so important to understand where all of this comes from. So let's go ahead without further ado and dive right in. So this one is on ancient Sumer, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, and then I'm going to go in chronological order. Usually we're taught in the esoteric world that our history goes back even further than ancient Sumeria, which is roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years when people talk about Atlantis and Lemuria. I'm of the opinion that Atlantis did exist and that our history goes back, to that era. But recorded history starts with ancient Sumeria. Okay. The end is the beginning. To understand where we are now, what we practice, what we believe, and the path that we are walking, we must look back, not briefly, but deeply, because none of this is new. Every ritual, every system, every concept we encounter today has roots stretching back thousands of years into ancient civilizations, temple systems, and mystery traditions that understood reality as a living, intelligent, and sacred. There is nothing new under the sun, only cycles of remembering and forgetting. What feels like discovery is often remembrance, and what feels like awakening is often recognition. What we call modern is often just a fragment of something much older, and if we do not understand where it came from, we cannot fully understand what we are doing now. We are not standing at the beginning of this path. We are stepping into something already in motion, and to walk it with clarity, we must first understand where it began. The origins of magic in Sumer and Egypt. The history of magic begins not in secrecy, but in the open heart of the earliest civilizations where ritual, kingship, astronomy, healing, and divine law were not separate disciplines, but expressions of a single living order. Long before magic was called a cult, it existed as the sacred science of maintaining harmony between the visible world and the unseen forces that shaped it. In these ancient cultures, the practitioners of magic was not an outsider, but a priest, a scribe, a healer, or a diviner, one entrusted with preserving the balance between humanity and the cosmos. What we now call magic was, to them, simply the correct application of divine law. Around 4000 to 3000 BCE, the first great temple civilizations arose in Sumer, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Cities such as Uruk, Eridu, and Ur were not merely political centers. They were sacred environments structured around divine presence. The temple stood at the center of life, functioning simultaneously as ritual chamber, archive, observatory, and seat of authority. Here, the earliest priesthoods began to formalize practices that would become the foundation of magic: ritual invocation, divine offerings, celestial observation, and the interpretation of signs. These were not occasional acts, they were woven into the rhythm of daily life, from agricultural cycles to royal decisions. The types of magic practiced in this era were primarily divinatory magic, protective magic, exorcistic rites, and ritual invocation. Divination was used to guide decisions, when to plant, when to go to war, how to interpret illness, or whether the gods favored a king's actions. Protective magic was used constantly through spoken incantations, inscribed amulets, and ritual objects placed in homes or buried beneath thresholds. Exorcistic practices were performed when illness or misfortune was believed to be caused by hostile forces. Invocation and offering rituals were conducted daily within temples to maintain harmony between the gods and the people. By circa 3200 BCE, the invention of writing, cuneiform, allowed these sacred practices to be recorded. This moment marks one of the most important thresholds in esoteric history. The spoken word had always carried power, but now it could be fixed, preserved, and transmitted across generations. Scribes became guardians of sacred knowledge, preserving hymns, invocations, omens, and ritual instructions. To write was not merely to record, it was to stabilize access to divine order. Knowledge was no longer fleeting, it became initiatory, structured, and guarded. This act alone is one of the greatest gifts to modern esotericism. Without these preserved texts, the entire lineage of ritual practice, astrology, and ceremonial structure would be lost. Within the early Sumerian and later Mesopotamian world, the cosmos was understood as alive with intelligences. Deities such as Inanna, Ishtar, the force of descent, power, and transformation, Enki, Lord of wisdom, water, and hidden knowledge, and Shamash, the solar arbiter of truth and justice, were not distant abstractions, but active presences. Their myths encoded more than theology. They revealed patterns of initiation, descent, rebirth, and cosmic law. The descent of Inanna, in particular, reflects one of the earliest known initiatory structures, the stripping away of identity, passage through hidden gates, and return transformed. This pattern is not symbolic alone. It is the blueprint that later becomes alchemical death and rebirth, initiatory trials, and the inner transformations still taught in esoteric systems today. As Sumerian civilization evolved into Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures, roughly 3000 to 1000 BCE, ritual practice became increasingly refined and systematized. Divination emerged as a central discipline. Priests read the liver of sacrificed animals, interpreted dreams, and observed anomalies in nature as messages from the divine. Most significantly, they turned their gaze upward. The sky became a sacred text. By circa 1800 to 500 BCE, Babylonian and Chaldean priests, astrologers, had developed increasingly sophisticated systems of celestial observation, tracking planetary movements and correlating them with earthly events. This was the earliest structured form of what would become astrology, one of the most enduring branches of magic still practiced today. These practices were not abstract. They shaped everyday life. Kings did not act without consulting omens. Illness was treated through both physical remedies and incantations. Homes were protected and with ritual inscriptions, and time itself was organized through celestial cycles. The individual did not stand apart from magic, they lived within it. What modern people often attempt to relearn as spiritual practice was, in this era, simply the way one navigated reality. Within this world, magic was operational and precise. Incantations were spoken with exact phrasing. Ritual superstitions were made to avert fate. Protective images and formulas were deployed to repel harmful forces. What we would later call occult practice existed here as sacred technology, methods passed through trained lineages, not improvised intuition. The practitioner did not invent the ritual, they enacted it according to inherited cosmic principles. This idea that ritual must align with deeper laws becomes a cornerstone of all later esoteric systems, including ceremonial magic, planetary magic, and even modern structured spiritual practice. Culturally, Mesopotamian life was shaped by instability, flood cycles, warfare between city-states, unpredictable harvest, and disease. In such a world, divination and ritual were not luxuries, they were necessities. and magic existed to protect the city, guide the king, heal the body, and maintain favor with the gods. It was collective, not individual, woven into survival of civilization itself. This collective orientation is something largely lost today, where magic is often practiced individually rather than as a shared cosmological responsibility. While Mesopotamia gave rise to structured divination and celestial science, ancient Egypt, flourishing along the Nile, beginning around circa 3000 BCE, developed one of the most enduring and symbolically rich visions of magic as cosmic alignment. If Mesopotamia revealed the heavens as a script, Egypt revealed reality itself as a sacred order that must be maintained, and that humans had a role in maintaining it. At the heart of Egyptian cosmology was Ma'at, the principle of truth, balance, harmony, and rightness. This was not an abstract moral ideal, but the very structure of existence. To live in accordance with Ma'at was to participate in cosmic stability. To fall out of alignment was to invite disorder. Supporting this order was the force known as Heka, a primordial power through which creation itself was shaped. Heka was not separate from religion. It was the very means by which divine power moved through the world. This is one of the clearest early definitions of magic, not something outside of reality, but the force that allows reality to be shaped through conscious alignment. The types of magic practiced in Egypt included ritual magic, Heka, funerary magic, protective magic, healing magic, and temple-based ceremonial work. These were deeply embedded into daily life. Protection spells were worn as amulets. Healing involved both herbal remedies and spoken invocations. The dead were prepared through elaborate rituals to ensure safe passage into the afterlife. Priests performed daily rites to sustain divine presence in temples. Even speech itself was considered an act of power when spoken correctly. During the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BCE, we see the emergence of funerary texts and pyramid inscriptions, early attempts to map the afterlife and ensure the successful transition of the soul. These would later evolve into the coffin text and the Book of the Dead, developing between 2000 and 1000 BCE, which contained invocations, divine names, protective formulas, and instructions for navigating the unseen realms. These texts are among the earliest structured examples of afterlife magic and guided spiritual passage, a concept that still appears today in ritual systems, ancestor work, and even modern spiritual frameworks about transition and consciousness beyond death. Here, the importance of language becomes unmistakable. To know the correct name of a force, deity, or gatekeeper was to gain access to its power. This principle, the power of the true name, remains foundational in modern ceremonial magic, mantra traditions, and invocation practices. Whether one is vibrating divine names, calling upon archetypal forces, or using sacred sound, the root of that practice can be traced directly back to these ancient systems. Egyptian priesthoods operated within a highly disciplined temple structure. Temples were not symbolic spaces. They were living cosmograms, designed to mirror the structure of the universe. Priests performed daily rites to maintain divine presence, purified themselves rigorously, and engaged in precise ceremonial acts involving sound, gesture, and offering. Statues of deities were treated not as representations, but as vessels through which divine presence could dwell. This concept, the ability to anchor or house spiritual force within an object or space, is still practiced today in altar work, consecration rituals, talisman creation, and ceremonial magic. Among the most influential figures in Egyptian sacred thought was Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, measurement, and hidden knowledge. Thoth, represented the principle that knowledge itself is divine mediation, the bridge between cosmic intelligence and human comprehension. In later centuries, particularly in Hellenistic Egypt, Thoth would be synchronized with the Greek Hermes, forming Hermes Trismegistus, a foundational figure in Western esotericism. Without Egypt's preservation of sacred knowledge, symbolic systems, and ritual structure, the later Hermetic tradition, which underpins much of Western occultism, would not exist. Egyptian cosmology also unified the heavens, the underworld, and earthly kingship. Deities such as Osiris, Lord of Death and Resurrection, Isis, Mistress of Magic and Restoration, Ra, the solar force, Anubis, guide of the souls, and Horus, divine kingship embodied, formed a symbolic system that governed both life and afterlife. These archetypal forces still live on today, not only in the direct esoteric study, but in symbolic frameworks, initiatory systems, and even psychological models of transformation. The story of death and rebirth, fragmentation and restoration, descent and ascent, these are not relics of the past. They are living patterns still used in modern spiritual work. Culturally, Egyptian life was shaped by the Nile cycles, agricultural stability, and a deep concern with continuity beyond death. Where Mesopotamia focused heavily on omens and divine interpretation, Egypt developed a profound system of afterlife science and symbolic immortality. Yet both civilizations shared a core understanding. The universe is ordered, alive, and responsive to ritual intelligence. This unified worldview is one of the most important aspects to recover. In the ancient world, there was no strict division between science, religion, and magic. Astronomy and astrology were one. Medicine and incantation overlapped. Writing, ritual, and divine law reinforced one another. The temple was a place of total knowledge, a convergence of disciplines that modern thinking has fragmented. Much of modern esotericism is, in essence, an attempt to reconstruct this lost unity. From Sumer and Egypt emerged the foundational pillars of the Western esoteric tradition: sacred language, divine names, ritual precision, celestial correspondence, priestly initiation, symbolic systems, and the understanding that visible reality is shaped by invisible forces. These were not marginal ideas, they formed the core of civilization. Without these early practices, without the preservation of ritual, the observation of the heavens, the use of sacred sound, and the structured transmission of knowledge, there would be no astrology as we know it, no ceremonial magic, no alchemy, no hermeticism, and no modern occult tradition to inherit. Thus, the earliest magicians were not outsiders or rebels. They were custodians of cosmic order. Their role was not to defy the universe, but to align with it, to interpret the heavens, to maintain balance, to protect the living, and to guide the dead. Magic, in its origin, was not an escape from reality, but a deeper participation in it. And what we practice today, in any form of esoteric work, is not new. It is an echo, a continuation, and in many ways, a remembering of what was first established in these ancient temples. By the end of these ancient civilizations, the essential framework of esotericism had been established. The cosmos as a living system, the importance of divine correspondence, and the use of ritual as a bridge between worlds, and the preservation of knowledge through disciplined transmission. As these currents move forward into Greece, Alexandria, and the wider Mediterranean world, they will merge with philosophy, mystery traditions, and new metaphysical systems, giving rise to Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and the first recognizable forms of Western esoteric thought. Okay, you guys, that's it for part 1. I will be putting out part 2 shortly. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.